Alrighty, welcome to Cycle 1 Art. Our first artist today is Giotto. He lived from 1266 to 1337. I would characterize Giotto as a medieval artist or a early Renaissance style artist. Let's take a look at two pieces of his artwork. What colors do you see in these paintings? I notice we have a lot of gold and some deep red, orange colors and a really rich deep blue. This color was called lapis lazuli, and artists made it out of a mineral in the ground, which is how they made many of their paintings. A lot of artwork during this time depicted biblical themes or religious themes for the church. We see that here. In the first painting, we actually have what artists would call a Madonna and Child, or this would be Mary and Jesus. And if you look around, there's a crowd of saints surrounding them and some angels. This second painting that was possibly damaged, is very old painting, so it's not quite as bright. But this scene is depicting the Nativity, and we see the family, the Holy Family there, and then once again surrounded by angels, which was very characteristic of Giotto's work. He always included angels, or he often included angels, and we see them there, and they often would have a golden halo around their head, and we see that here in both of these paintings. The first one, the angels are kneeling on the side, and in the second one, we have the angels flying above the Nativity. Okay, so for this project, we're going to actually create one of these angels. Similar to what Giotto did, he would have been painting on a wood panel. So the supplies you're going to need for this is a piece of white paper that I've just cut in I cut a point at the top, a kind of triangle top. I also have some gold washi tape because we want to make this look like a wood panel like Giotto would have prepared. So we're going to trim out our panel in fancy gold. I also have some oil pastels. I'm going to be using white, a skin tone color, depending on what color you want your skin, color for hair, and definitely that bright orange red, and then blue for my lapis lazuli. The next thing that we're going to be creating our own paint. So we're going to have either crushed up chalk. You could use turmeric, which is a rich golden spice. You could use bee pollen for this. Any type of rich colored dust would work. And you'd want to demonstrate to your kids how the artist would have used a tool, pestle and mortar, to crush up the color. I just used a spoon to make sure my powder was nice and fine. I have 1 egg yolk and I have a little cup of water, and I'm going to mix those together. A teaspoon of, I already had some mixed up, but I added a little bit more. Teaspoon of my color, my dust, teaspoon of my egg, and then I added about 2 teaspoons of water, and I really mixed it together. You might want to use a fork and really whisk that color up until you get all of that dust mixed together. That's going to be your first step. You can take this color and scoop it into a little painter's palette for your students. I'm going to paint directly from this bowl, but really mixing it to prepare it for my students. Okay, I'm going to set that to the side. You might want a parent to get those palettes ready. Make sure each one of your students also has a paintbrush for when we paint their golden background for our Giotto style angels. All right. So we're going to take our white piece of paper, and our first step is we're going to trim it out with our gold washi tape. This should be a fun step for the students. You're basically giving them a border. But during this time, you can talk to your students about how medieval artists, Renaissance artists couldn't just run to Michael's and buy a prepared canvas to work on. They couldn't just go to the store and buy their paint. They would have had to prepare their supplies and to be ready to create their work of art. So this is them prepping their artwork. They've prepped their paint, and now they're prepping their panel. Medieval artists would have been painting on wood panels most likely, or a fresco, which we'll talk about later during this cycle. Okay, so I'm just trimming it out. Those little hands in some of the younger classes might need some help with this. Sometimes washi tape doesn't like to stick. They shouldn't use the word tape in it. You might have to use actual real Scotch tape on the back to get this to stick down. Your border tape, or maybe just a little bit of a glue stick would work here too. I did manage to get mine to stay. All right, so for our next step, I'm gonna have you grab your oil pastels. We're gonna start with a peach color. All right, so have your students grab a light color out of their box. Peach works, pink would work here. Even a really light yellow would work. This is almost like the color we're going to sketch with. I'm gonna look back at my sample photos and we're gonna create an angel here. I'm gonna walk you through some basic steps to help each one of your students draw an angel. Start by drawing a small oval towards the top of your white piece of paper, just like that. When we have this short amount of time to draw and create art with our students, it's helpful for us to all do a guided drawing together. That's why I would encourage you to have your students all draw the same thing. Now I'm going to draw almost a triangle shape. I'm not going to color this in. I colored my oval in, which will be my base, but now I'm just sketching the arm. So I'm going to do 2 triangles, and then I'm going to color in a smaller oval for my hands. Now I'm going to draw a line down to create the skirt and another line down, and I can make that angel's dress or that angel's skirt as billowy as we want it. And we can talk about how medieval artists or Renaissance artists really came up with this idea that this is the way angels look, and we know from reading the Bible they looked nothing like this. So now we're gonna, right from the base of our oval we drew, or our head, we're gonna draw a straight line out, and then we're gonna draw a line down, and we're gonna use a zigzag line. We're incorporating our oil terms from the beginning of the year, using a zigzag line to create the bottom of the wings. Now, because we're using oil pastels, you can explain to your students that they're really blendable color, and it doesn't matter that we sketched this in the peach color. We used a light color, and we're going to be able to go right over them. And we're examining our sample paintings by Giotto now to think about which colors we're going to use. I'm going to grab a bright orangey red, and I'm going to trace over my angel's gown using my red. I'm not going to color the whole thing in because I'm going to use a white oil pastel to blend that color together. So I'm just shading it all in, and then I'll grab my white and I'll start to blend it so it gives my angel's gown a little bit of movement when I use more than one color. But it's important to kind of limit the colors, but my white will blend that red out. So I'm going to have value. I'm going to have a darker red and a lighter red by blending them together. I'm going to do the same thing on my sleeves. I'm going to trace them out, and then I'm going to highlight them with my white. I'll fill them in just a little bit, but kind of leave a little bit of white towards the edge. All right. Now, I look back at my sample paintings again. Whoops, nope, I'm gonna add the hair. So I grabbed a brown, and this is a good time to talk to your students about how hair grows on your head, and not just sitting on top of your head. So I go right towards the middle of my peach oval, and I just fill in a little hair shape. Make sure nobody's drawing the hair sitting on top of their head, which is what some of your younger students might try to do. Encourage them to fill in the hair. And then I want you to look at that. Each one of the angels in Giotto's paintings has that characteristic gold halo showing that it's a holy figure. So I used a gold. You could use a yellow and color in that halo. And then I take a look at those wings, and in one of the paintings in the Nativity, the wings were almost a brownish color. And in the Madonna and Child painting, the wings had a blue tinge. So I'm going to take a bright blue and I'm going to trace the outside of the wings. You can see my zigzag line there. And then I'm going to use my white to blend that together with my blue, and it's going to make a light blue in my wings. Oil pastels are so good for these lessons because they're easy to work with and they're not that messy. Okay, this next step is the fun step. Each one of your students is going to need a paintbrush, and then they're going to need a little bit of that paint that we made at the beginning. You could set up stations in your room where you have you are leading the students through a drawing, and then you bring them over as you clean the room up one at a time or two at a time with a parent to paint the background, or you could just put their trays in the middle. This is not messy, so it's not hard for them to do. We're going to use our paint we made, and that whole background we're going to paint this rich yellow color that you created from either gold chalk dust or turmeric or bee pollen would work here. And we're going to spread it out. Any dust that didn't get mixed in with the paint, it's not a perfect science mixing these paints together. You can actually spread around nicely with your paintbrush, which you can see me do here. So we're going to get all of that filled in. Alrighty, now that you've finished painting in your egg tempera, you could be done if you had the smaller kids, but for those of you with an older class, if you have a little bit of extra time, you could take an 8.5 by 11 piece of black construction paper, take your angel on your panel that you prepared and glue it down, and that will help you create a more finished piece of art.